Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to start our Data Markets for Digital Sovereignty event. And my name is Justina Bielowskaite. I'm Project Director at the European Digital SME Alliance. In my capacity as Project Director for more than 3 years, I've been overseeing the iFree Market project, in the framework of which we are also having this event today. And the project itself, it aims to help companies to sell with data between different data marketplaces. So to share data using different marketplaces at the same time. That's very briefly, and we will have more speakers that will explain more details later on. However, in the background of this, I got a fantastic opportunity to work with our members, digital companies, data-driven companies that provide innovation to various vertical sectors in Europe, be it healthcare, be it automotive, etc., any industrial sectors one can imagine. Through these years, we tried to explain them iFree Market. We tried to explain the technologies behind it. We tried to speak about data marketplaces, data spaces, data ownership and share of data, different opportunities that both technically and legally are out there to share data. We face many companies and many SMEs who do have problems accessing data, and that stops the innovation. That does not allow them to provide the best solutions possible to some more traditional sectors. As such, we understood that challenges are technological, such as the ones that iFree Market or also Gaia X are trying to answer, but also legal. There is a lot of uncertainty and still a lot of questions that SMEs are wondering about. As such, recently in all these years, while we are running projects, there were many legal changes. So we have Data Act, we have DSA, DMA, Data Governance Act, and many other discussions. So in the background of all of this, and in the light of many questions that I and my colleagues have received through the years, we decided that in the last month of this project, we should put together the best experts and speakers that we have met on the way to discuss this and to explain all the complexity to our SME community. And here is why we are here today. So this is just a brief explanation for you to understand what's going to happen. And as such, today we will have two very interesting panels, before which we will also have two keynote speakers that will try to make sense out of all of it for all of you. As such, I will ask our speakers to try to be a bit simple, not use too many slides, and speak engagingly, so that all our participants that maybe also are still a bit lost in this forest could very well understand what we are talking about. So today we are also recording the event, so all the participants and everyone who registered for the event upon registration had a link to our privacy policy. But if you have any other questions about this, please contact myself or my colleagues that are here today, and we will explain you any questions that you might have. In addition, I welcome everyone to write questions at any time of the event to the chat. So my colleagues will be monitoring this, and our speakers, all the speakers, both keynotes, but also the speakers in the two upcoming sessions, will be glad to answer. Today, the event will be moderated by my colleague, Antonio Grasso, who is our policy director, and he will take the floor to lead the rest of the event. However, before that, I would like to invite our first keynote speaker, Mr. Federico Milani, who is Deputy Head of Unit at Data Policy and Innovation Unit at DG Connect, to start our event. Federico, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. So when we are talking, my unit is responsible for the coordination and the activities related to data of the European Commission, especially those one that has been announced in the data strategy. So when we are talking about digital sovereignty and data markets, looking it into the perspective of the data strategy, what we are trying to do is to really empower who generates the data, and giving him access, giving him the possibility to accessing the data and to share the data with organizations, third parties that will have the possibility of providing additional services. To this extent, we've done a number of initiatives that some of them have resulted in, for example, a piece of legislation like the Data Governance Act, or a proposal that is now currently under discussion in a trialogue with members, with the Council and the Parliament, the Data Act, but also a number of initiatives where we are supporting the creation, for example, of data spaces, which is in a sort of sense, an extended version of data markets. So all these initiatives and activities are really making possible to create an environment of trust where data can be shared and reused, but where also the data holder, in terms of the who has created the data, has got the possibility of keeping the control of the data. So what have you done? What have we done more precisely? In the Data Governance Act, which has been adopted and it's going to be it's going to enter into force in September 2023, so this September, what we have created is a number of initiatives that will allow, for example, the emergence of new actors like the neutral data intermediaries, which will allow in a brokering systems to the data holders to provide to the data users the data in a controlled manner. So making sure that the data users follow up a specific condition on what is the term of use of the data, for which purpose they can use the data. And also the data holder will have control on who can access basically the data. Together with that, we are promoting the concept of data altruism, because we know that there are a number of organizations, but also personal citizens that would like to share the data, for example, for research purposes, for the benefit of society. The clear example would be health data, but there is also, I don't know, the other example that comes into my mind is mobility data in order to improve the public transport in the town where you live. So the data altruism organization, registered data altruism organization, will assure you that when you share the data will be processed and accessed only for the purpose that you would like to share the data and make it available. These are a number of activities that then are combined with the creation of data spaces. Data spaces are spaces, marketplaces, if you want to, where organizations are allowed to share the data in a way that the data holders, so who share the data, will always know who's accessing the data and for which purposes. So it's not a creation of a platform or a system where I put my data and everybody that can get access to that data will access that data. It's a system where a user will be able to find the data, but before to access the data, they will have to enter in an agreement with the data holders. This is why they are, in a sort of sense, marketplaces, and this is why usually what we expect is that there will be a data intermediaries that will play the function of connecting the data user to the data provider. And in that one, we've started to finance a number of projects through the Digital Europe program, so that the creation, the stakeholders that are interested in sharing the data will be able to discuss and try to identify the use cases and try to set up and define an architecture where to develop it. We haven't done only that, but we have also we are also starting a contract in order to develop really the technical infrastructure, so the basic middle layer software that will allow the creation of these data spaces. And this support and effort to support the creation of data spaces will continue until the end of the Digital Europe program, so until 2027 at least. So these are activities that we are doing. And then we've got the Data Act that for small, medium enterprises could be extremely interesting, because what we are doing there is, again, empower the user of smart devices, IoT devices, to have access to the data, or to have the possibility to give access to the data that the machine that he is using has generated to third parties to provide new services. And this is mainly focusing on small medium enterprises, because there is specific provision that regards small medium enterprises. So this process, for example, will not the gatekeepers, as defined by the DSA and the DMA, will be excluded by the possibility of using this process. This is because we want to support and enforce and promote innovation and the emergence in Europe of new SMEs or new companies that can provide several services. This is basically our idea in few words of what we are trying to do and what we would like to support, which is the emergence of a different type of using the data and sharing the data that we see in other countries, where, for example, there is a major concentration of data in small in small companies, in big companies, in a few number of companies, or there is a great concentration of data in government that can use the data without having who generates data doesn't have full control of the data. This is why we are associating the possibility of getting control of the data to the digital sovereignty concept. If I have access to the data, if I can control who can get access to the data that I'm generating, then it will be much easier for me to have control of all the other products and services that are turning around, that are making use of my data. And with that on, I think I finished, so that there will be plenty of time for discussion and comments. Thank you very much, and back to you, Justin.
Thank you so much, Federico. Please allow me as well from my side to give a warm welcome to all our speakers today and all our guests online, and also thank my colleague Justina for the kicking off this event. We are very much looking forward to a fruitful discussion, and I would like to already stimulate this discussion, Federico, because you gave us some crucial thoughts about the role of the legislation in triggering innovation, bottom-up innovation that is coming from SMEs. I would like already to go a little bit into the granularities of this legislation, especially when it comes to the Data Governance Act. There is a key role there for the data intermediary services. We know that at the end of the day, where innovation happens is with the software companies. SMEs are more and more providing services that go into this direction, that are software-based services, digital services. Could you tell us a little bit more when it comes to the Data Governance Act? What happens to the company that are defined as data intermediaries, and what is the process that these type of companies needs to follow to comply with the provision of the Data Governance Act?
Okay, so it's the process and how it's going to happen. It's explained in part on the DGA, because what they will have to do is to go to the opposite authority on the member states and declare themselves as neutral data intermediaries. In order to do that, they will have to fulfill a number of requirements that are written in the DGA. This will happen, could happen only after, as I was saying, September. I think it's the 24th of September where the DGA will enter into force. So what we are doing now in order to make sure that both from member states and organization will be ready in order to start and to make exploit this possibility from September basically onwards. We are doing a number of workshops with member states in order to so that there will be a certain level of harmonization between the various member states on the on who is going to be the competent authority that are going to provide this, how they are going to set up a registry for the data intermediaries, and especially which are going to be the sanction and how it's going to be the process for verifying if a if someone that apply for becoming a data intermediary will be a data intermediary. But then we are also working with organization, and there's going to be a workshop with organizations that are interested in becoming data intermediaries in June, probably, where we are going to discuss with them which are, in their opinion, the main difficult point in order to be able to become a data intermediaries, and to see if these are really real problems, or if sometimes it's a misinterpretation of what is the DGA. One of the things that we noticed, for example, is that many organizations thinks that by data intermediaries cannot be sustainable because there is no business model behind it, because they cannot get money from their intermediation activities. But that's not true. What we do not want is that data intermediaries will gain benefits and profit for the bundling, interpretation of data, and selling the data that they've collected from the data holders and data providers. But nothing stopped the data intermediaries, for example, for getting money, so basing their business model on offering services of intermediation. So as I was saying before, giving the possibility of finding the data, but also establishing and providing support for establishing a contract between data providers and data users. So this is all the things that we are trying to do in order to prepare, as I was saying, not only the member states, but also the organization to think and then apply for becoming data intermediaries.
All right, thank you so much, Federico. These are indeed important points that we want to throw there in the discussion in order to really understand today and give our community of small and medium enterprises the chance to put the regulatory work that the European Commission, the European Union is doing when it comes to regulating data spaces and promoting innovation into this type of context, and what is coming from the market. What are the evolution, what are the developments that we see in the unfolding of opportunities and challenges for small and medium innovators from the market. So yes, please.
Sorry to interrupt you. And by the way, if someone of your members for the Digital SME Alliance has got an interest in becoming data intermediaries, if they can, through you, come to me and provide their details, we might consider them, as I was saying, inviting in this type of workshop, so that they can get also a more direct, the possibility of discussing with other organizations that are interested. So this is one thing that we can offer.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for this as well, Federico. We will then definitely be in touch, because We are sure from our membership there will be several companies that will be indeed more than keen to liaise with your unit on this very important legislative work. From, as I was saying, from the opportunities and challenges that are unfolding from the market, we would like also to focus today where is the role that small and medium-sized innovators can play. And therefore, we are very delighted to have here today with us and next to me here in Brussels, Professor Nikos Lautais, who is a director of the IMDEA Networks Institute in Madrid, and in particular, director of its data transparency group. It will help us understanding the value of data, the pricing of data in the context of data marketplaces. So over to you, Nikos. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank you for the introduction. Or maybe I will confuse people even more. So let's see. Hello, everyone. Is my slides? Thank you, everyone, and thank you for inviting me and hosting this very interesting meeting. I will present today a very recent measurement study that I did with a graduating student of mine, Santiago Andres Azcoitia, who will be defending his PhD thesis on the data economy next week. He was the first PhD student that I got when I moved from Barcelona to Madrid and to IMDEA, and this coinciding with me switching from privacy-related research that I was doing before to getting into this data economy space that I must say that DigiConnect, the data unit of DigiConnect of Federico's probably was the first organization that made me aware of all these things. There was a public consultation that was launched several years ago. Malte, I think, who is from the same unit, had invited me to contribute because of the work that I was doing back in Telefonica around privacy. So that was my first contact with this area. And it was on the back of my mind for a lot of time. At some point, I realized that some of the privacy problems that I was studying, they were probably results of broken underlying data economics. So I got excited with the area and jumped into it with my students and in my new position at IMDEA. And initially, I was trying to come up with a theory about how to price data. I tried a lot, and I pushed my students and my collaborators. We didn't go very far, to be honest. We are trying to come up with some magic theory that you give it some data and it will tell you how valuable it is without knowing the context and all the other stuff. Now I believe that something like that is probably not doable. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I'll be happy if somebody can answer this for me. So at some point we said, okay, since we cannot make a lot of progress here, let's go and do our usual trick, which is, in the past I've been doing large-scale internet measurements to characterize things, online price discrimination, target advertising, which is all the things that I was speaking before going into this area. So I asked my students, my graduating student and a previous student of mine, Mr. Kostas Jordan, who's now a professor in Cyprus, to develop some measurement methodology, go out and look at what is being sold by data marketplaces. Okay, and before doing that, we had to first compile a list of data marketplaces. So my student Santiago that I mentioned before dropping everything and coming to do a PhD with me, he was a consultant for many years, so he was very good at doing things like that. So Santi really went and he searched the web. He used any possible source of information that he could find. And he did a very nice study analyzing the business models of close to 200 data intermediaries, let's say, right? So I have many logos on these slides. I can tell you in advance that most of them are small companies, startups and SMEs and so on. But among them, if you look carefully, you will find Amazon, AWS that operates a data marketplace, and some other big companies, okay? So the bottom line was that there are many companies appearing in this space to play the intermediary role, and the business models pursued by these companies, they are vastly different. There are all kinds of companies over there, right? So there are companies that intermediate. There are companies that specialize on personal data, on B2B industrial data, sector specific. In terms of how they monetize the data, there are a bunch of very different business models. Some companies host the data, some other companies host only access to and rights to get the data from somebody else. And it's a really broad space. I think on the bottom of the slide, there should be a reference to the paper. Anyhow, there's a lot of interesting stuff to find in a paper where we analyzed all this stuff, and it's everything that I will present. It's available from our website, so you can look into it. But beyond doing just an analysis of the business models, we really wanted to go deeper and try to understand what kind of data is being sold and at what price. So usually when I go into a new research area and I start a new PhD, I only go into areas where I cannot even guess the answer of the question that I have. So the question that we had was, okay, how much does a typical commercial data set sell for online, right? So before doing this work, I could not answer this question. So I felt that this is a good topic to put my time. So what we did with my students is that we took these 200 data marketplaces that we analyzed, and we tried to see how many of them made available their catalog, the data products that they sell. Okay, and that was obviously a subset because most of them were saying that we have the data, but they would not give you the catalog. They would not tell you what type of data you had. You had to first have an agreement with them or talk to them before they give you the catalog. Some were giving you the catalog, but the catalog was in a format that we could not systematically access and analyze. And finally, there were many in which they were giving you a subset of the catalog, or they were not telling you the prices. Long story short, in the end, we zoomed into 10 data marketplaces that included some of the biggest ones, the Amazon data marketplace, DataArray, Datvaneo, and some other companies. I don't know if any of these companies are up. If anyone from these companies is on the call, if you are, please yell. And what we did is that we developed specialized software to go to their websites and scrape information from these websites and basically make a big list of commercial data sets that are being sold and the price of each data product and all the information that describes the product. So this information in some cases was free text, but there was also structured information, in how many data subjects or for how long, in terms of duration, geographic space covered by this data set. And the results, you can see them on this table. I can tell you that we collected data for around 215,000 data products from some 2,000 sellers and intermediaries. But if you look at the bottom of the slide, out of all these 200, most was data that was indexed there for free. So it was open data, right? It was not commercial. But some 12,000 data products were actually paid. They were commercial. You needed to pay some money to get access to them. And out of these 12,000, only 4,000 of them had an actual price over there. So the first takeaway from this study was that most data sets that are made available are actually packaged open data that you can also get from somewhere else. A small percentage is like data that's commercial, you need to pay for it. But even for this commercial data, very few intermediaries or sellers actually release a price. Okay. But still, we managed to gather pricing data for at least 4,000 commercial data sets. And by the way, this is the first and biggest measurement study that has been done in the topic. And once we have this, we had already this data set, we started analyzing it. And the first question that we asked is what I told you in the beginning. How much does a typical commercial data set sell for? Okay. It is here. And before going into that, let me tell you that on the plot on the left, we have an API-based business model. Basically, you are getting the data by connecting to an API, and you pay a subscription by month. Okay. On the right plot of this slide, I hope you can make up the numbers. You can see the numbers and the annotations. On the right subplot, we have another business model that relates to downloading or buying a fixed data set, a data set that has historic data from a certain period of time. This is a one-off download that you pay only once. So if you look at the API monthly cost of accessing data, then the median price turned out to be $1,400 per month. That was just the median price out of these 4,000 commercial data sets for which we had prices. If you looked at the extremes, though, of this plot, you will see that there are some data sets where you need to pay more than $100,000 per month to access the API. And then there are many that are cheaper and so on, and there's some distribution over there. All this data, by the way, are available online. I will give you a link in the end where you can download our data set and look for yourself. If you go to the other plot, the one-off purchase of static data, then the median price was a little bit higher. It was $2,200 for a one-off download of a zip file, let's say, that has something inside. And then if you look at the extreme, there was a data set that costed almost $1 million, right? So it's $800,000. So this was like a credit card information from the US for a lot of time. So that's one expensive zip file to download. Okay. Then the next question that we asked was, okay, what categories of data cost more or less? Okay. And in this slide, I will give you the analysis that we did for two specific data marketplaces, Amazon's data marketplace and DataRate, that are the two biggest ones, basically, right now, in terms of the number of commercial data sets that they have, not open free data sets, right? So if you look at these box plots over there, as far as Amazon is concerned, data that relates to the telecom sector, manufacturing, automotive, and gaming had the highest prices. If you look at the right, DataRate, it was credit rating, mobile apps, healthcare, and web. And then if you look at the other terms and categories that you have on the y-axis, on the x-axis, you will notice that there are different categories on these two data marketplaces. So it's not easy to directly compare between them. And this happens for a very simple reason. And this reason being that each one of these data marketplaces is using a different categorization system to label the data products that they make available so that the potential customers can browse through the catalogs or search. So each one of these data marketplaces using a different category system. So it's not easy to compare prices between data marketplaces directly. So here I have an example from DataRate where there is a data product that costs $400,000 per year to access, and it's credit card transactions, and they tag it, they label it as commercial data, commerce data, okay? Now, if you go to AWS and you look at another data product, which is basically the similar, right? It has credit card transactions, they label it as retail data and financial data. So they're using different systems, so you cannot compare directly between different data sets. And to solve this problem, what we did basically is that we took the labeling system of Amazon and we trained a classifier, a machine learning classifier, that if you gave it the meta information of a data set, the textual description, the words that somebody puts under the title of the data set to describe what it is, it would predict its category, okay? I don't want to go into the technical details. We did a lot of work here to come up with this classifier, but eventually we build a classifier that is good enough to do this job, that you give it a data set and it gives you with high accuracy what type of data set is. And then we took this classifier and we threw all the 4,000 data products that we had and we asked it to classify them so that we could have a global ranking out of our entire data set and not only AWS to see what was the which data set command the highest pricing. And the results are in this plot. And it turned out that gaming, manufacturing, telecom, and automotive data commanded the highest prices across all the data sets that we saw. And this was kind of consistent as you look between different data marketplaces. Okay, there's a lot of things that I'm skipping here, but you can find them on the reports and the papers that we have online. Then the next question that we asked was, okay, we understand what type of data sets command the highest prices, but we wanted to see whether there are specific features, characteristics that make a data set cost more or less. And we looked at a number of features of a data set, which include time scope, whether there's data for 1 month or 1 year or 10 years, geographical coverage, whether it is data from one city versus one continent or one country, the delivery method of the data set, whether they give you, I don't know, a zip file or an API, or they put it on a S3 bucket in AWS. And finally, there were even more interesting things like identifiability. There are many data sets that give you anonymized data about transactions without allowing you to reconstruct sessions, without allowing you basically to follow what a particular consumer is buying. They're just telling you that many pieces of this product were sold there. This is one type of data set, and it's a different type of data set that tells you this particular consumer, anonymized, but with a fixed identifier. On Monday, he bought this, and then on Tuesday, he bought something else. So identifiability has to do whether the data set has constant identifiers to reconstruct how an individual or a company behaves, or whether these identifiers are removed. So which features impact on the prices? Again, we built classifiers, a bunch of machine learning classifiers. We looked at different metrics. I don't want to go to the technical details. In the end, we came up with a classifier.
Indeed, these tables recall to me very interesting methodologies of study back from my classes in econometrics back in the days now.
Yeah.
But since I'm already curious to go back to Federico to hear what he thinks about the findings of the studies that you are illustrating to us, may I ask you maybe to go straight into the conclusion?
I'll go straight to the conclusion. So let me go directly to the conclusions before going. Let me go to the conclusions. The conclusion is that data products sell at an immensely wide range of prices. Okay, that can go up to 1 million, as I said. That there is no single feature that can be attributed as something that will point to a higher price or a lower price, right? There's no single individual thing that you say that if a data set can reconstruct sessions, it's going to be more expensive, or if it's coming from US, it's going to be less or more expensive. But when we did feature engineering and we combined multiple features, it turned out that 2/3 out of the price of a data set come from two things. One is volume, how much data it has. And the other thing is what the data is. And what the data is, I will need half an hour to explain what it means, but you need to trust me. And then the third 1/3 of the impact on the price are more specific things, is whether you can reconstruct sessions, how easy it is to get the data from the intermediary or the data sort, the geographic coverage, data from US turned out to be more expensive than Europe, how fresh the data is. All this stuff together impacted the price by 1/3. 2/3 was volume and what it is. And this is like the summary of everything. And the data is available from our study, from these links that I put over there. And to close it, I just wanted to self-advertise a little bit that we are organizing, we created a data economy workshop to bring more computer scientists to look into this problem. The first version, we hosted it last December in Rome, and we had some very interesting keynote speaker. Damian Bosselager was there from the parliament. Bruce Pond from Ocean Protocol and so on gave a talk over there. And several people were trying to put together a community of computer scientists to look at the technical problem. And the next one will be in June in Seattle. And just to thank the European projects that are funding my research, Databricks and MLEdge, which is like a Spanish national project in the area. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Nikos. Thanks a lot, because this is really helping us to, put our discussion in a frame and highlight issues that comes from your finding. So now, in our attempt to, have a discussion that is both around legislative initiatives and marketplaces, I'm really curious to hear back from Federico. How do you think that the legislative initiatives that the Commission is taking help addressing some of the issues that Nikos illustrated as an outcome of his research? And do you see that the legislation will be able to tackle some of the issues highlighted here over the next few years?
Yeah, well, it was extremely interesting to a presentation because it gives also us information about how the market of selling data and providing data and data sets is developing. As it was mentioned, the issue is that for the moment, it's, well, first of all, difficulties of accessing the data and finding the data. And in that case, some high costs can be explained, because if it is difficult to access the data, then the price will rise for the people that are able to collect the data and make it available. What we are tending, or what our main objective is making sure that all the data that is collected will be easier to get access to it. This probably will have an effect on the price of it, but on the other hand, we believe that the most important objective for us is really access and reuse of the data. One of the points that has not been mentioned also is that although sometimes everybody believes that access to data is a commodity that it's not, since it can be reused several times, the value remains the same. I'm sure that it has been noticed that if the data has been already used for a specific purpose, then it loses in a sort of sense its value, because companies that are interested to that data believes that there is already a company that is exploiting the value in that specific sector. This is why, again, we are trying to promote the use of data and the use of different sources of data, in order that the combination will increase its value and the possibility of developing new services. So it's extremely interesting, and as I was saying, we are going and we are pushing in the direction to have more data available, easier to get access to, so that really the market, having more people sharing the data, will be probably easier to analyze and easier to identify which is also the cost and the value of the data.
Thank you so much, Federico. And talking about the use and the reuse of data, we have learned from you, Nikos, that we have a different categorization of data and business models. Perhaps one insight that we would like to have from you here is from the market, and this is something that is coming up also from the participants online as a request. From the market, do you see a fragmentation of the business models that are generated through the use and reuse of data, or do you see a kind of consolidation of these business models?
No, I think it's very fragmented. It's very fragmented. I mean, in terms of multiple things, pricing, the most basic things, even the categorization of data sets. So for a data buyer at this point, I mean, imagine that you need some data to train a machine learning algorithm to do something, right? There are 200 data sources over there, so you would need to register in each one of these data marketplaces and try to find whether they have what you're looking for. There's no single way to search, right?
Mm.
The inverse thing, if you're a data seller, you have some data set and you want to monetize it, where would you list it? Would you need to list it in all 200? You know, and some of them, you know, it takes time to create an account and list it, and sometimes not even possible to do that online. You need to sign a paper, you know, go on board, pay, have a deal. So yeah, it's hugely fragmented for multiple reasons that even go beyond all this thing. Even the format of the dataset, how you download it, how it is represented, how it is described. Each one of these companies is using its own thing. So yeah, it's hugely fragmented.
And this is clearly a limitation also to.
It is. I mean, to me, I'm coming from computer networks research. So sometimes I say that to me, this looks like pre-internet networking. You know, before we had the internet, different companies had different protocols for the local area networks, and one local area network was not talking to another one. And then at some point, these things got connected. So I think we are in a pre-internet kind of situation here.
Thank you so much.
I
I know
also-
Tusi has a burning question as well.
It's a very interesting question, since we also have discussion in the chat that you cannot see right now. But if you could just get back to the slide where we had this initial analysis of how many different data sets.
The juicy stuff, by the way, is here. It's on the paper.
So it was before,
the prices.
even before this one.
This one.
So yes, we had some people reacting that indeed it's not that many that you have, right? And the question was like, what does it mean? Does it mean that market is not yet ready? And we had also more questions following up on that. Maybe data gravity is due to a lock-in effect with egress costs, maybe lack of properly defined data usage rights to decide if data can or can't be used. And then another idea, maybe because of lack of technical enforcement of data usage rights. So it's a wide question.
So let me
And
tell
many
you,
options.
okay, let me comment a little bit. I should have stayed a little bit longer here because there are things that I didn't mention. For me, the elephant in the room here is that first, that the number of commercial data sets is just a small subset of everything that is being listed there. That's one. And probably an even bigger elephant is that most intermediaries or direct sellers, they don't disclose a price, right? So they may say that this is a paid data set and this is what it includes. But if you are interested, call us. I don't know if you understand what this means.
Yeah.
This means kind of that they're going to tailor a price for you, right? So this is not like Amazon where you want to buy a pair of shoes and it costs $100 for everyone. This is like when you don't disclose the price and then you are asked to first describe what you will use the data for, who you are, and then they will give you a price. This is a pricing scheme that we can discuss whether it makes sense or is the most efficient one or not. That's one thing to discuss. The other thing is that there are many data sets over there that are very expensive. And, you know, I'm wondering really who buys these data sets, because what if you buy this data set and then you use it to train your machine learning algorithm and turns out that is not a good data set, right? There's junk inside, right? How do you know? So, and this, you know, I don't come from business, you know, I'm a computer scientist, but how are you going to build a new market when accessing the data, despite all the other difficulties of finding it, understanding what it is, when you need to pay a serious amount of money for many companies, especially for SMEs that want to build some machine learning driven business model. So you need to pay up front without knowing whether the data set is going to be useful, right? So how will this market ever take off? I don't know.
So these are all important issues that bring us actually to the topic of how to connect these different markets, these data spaces. And that is why, while thanking once again for this fascinating insights, Nikos, and for the insights from the legislative level, Federico. I would like to continue this discussion, and we are delighted if both you, Nikos, and Federico can stay with us for the rest of our event. I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, who is Pierre Gonlier, Chief Technology Officer from Gaia-X, and I believe he is our perfect speaker to talk about how we acknowledge this reality in the market, and we put the condition forward for interoperability of cross data spaces. So welcome, Pierre, and we are very much looking forward what role Gaia-X plays within this reality in the market. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I have a very low link connectivity, so I might disable my camera if that's okay with you.
Of course.
I'm just to say hi. Then we'll close my camera, share the screen, and it will be a bit smoother. The point of with Gaia-X is to build the data spaces, to build the link between the data spaces and the federations. The data spaces, we define that more with a business point of view, meaning that this is very similar to some extent, I believe, equivalent to ownership from the data mesh modeling or the one aware that architecture. And the data space, looking at the latest definition also that we have with data space business center, was, for example, the place that specify and maintain the governance rules. Then we have the there is different name for them, federation, infrastructure, and that's more like the technical point of view. This is composed of one or more data connectors, data warehouse, data lakes, and this is very much the infrastructure point of view which is defined by the set of service endpoints that expose data sets. And the database can be spanned across several of those infrastructure federations, and a federation can be used by several data spaces. There is no obligation to have a one-on-one mapping between a data space and the place there where the data is being exchanged. When we get those data space and federation, so those two couples, you have a lot of them already existing. Gaia-X focuses on the governance across data spaces, meaning that if we don't have the same definition of a pricing plan, what is a party, what is a legal participant, what is an authorization, what is a consent, then there will be no exchange of data across data spaces. We already have a lot of data spaces, but we are seeing this cross data spaces interoperability. And it cannot be limited only to technical implementation with some software. That's very much about the governance and the rules. So the model of Gaia-X is to connect the data and infrastructure ecosystems. We, from Gaia-X point of view, we split this in pillars. Pillars that are the data exchange, federation, and another one which is called compliance. If we look at today's state of the art to implement those, usually you have PDF, very cumbersome manual onboarding, and I think that was illustrated in the previous presentation, where indeed you tailor the contract for everyone you talk to, which is a scheme that it's not easy to adopt. We want with Gaia-X to have something way more automatable and transparent. So for every of the three pillars, compliance, federation, data exchange, we have functional specification, technical specification, and an open source implementation. So 3 columns, 3 rows. So on overall, maximum 9 deliverables. The next part of the presentation is, I think, way better if you have the slides in front of you. So sorry for that.
Perhaps, Pierre,
but we'll have the slide afterwards.
Pierre, may I ask you, please, because we will be able to share the slides only afterward with our participants. May I ask you, please, to summarize your intervention, telling us, in your experience with the technology that you have developed at GaiaX, what you would describe as the most promising technology that guarantees interoperability of data spaces in Europe and that you see in the future basically triggering the sharing and resharing of data in our continent?
Thank you very much for the question. We are basing the GaiaX compliance on verifiable credentials and linked data. That's for describing the information. W3C verifiable credentials are a very convenient way to carry the information, to verify if the information has been tampered with, to verify who issued the information. And the linked data is something that enables to describe an open world. So both combined, linked data information, RDF, inside the W3C verifiable credentials is for us the way to go forward, build a decentralized knowledge graph. If you don't manage to decentralize knowledge graph, then it will stay highly centralized in a handful of services. And I think that's what we see today with, for example, the search engine, the catalogs, the marketplace, the cloud offerings. It's highly concentrated, and we struggle a bit to reduce implementation on the European market. So we need to find a way to decentralize that. Another piece of technology that I believe will be very relevant, that's on the of the consent and authorization. For that, with other associations, so this is not a decision that we are taking GaiaX alone. In GaiaX, we work a lot with IDSA, with FiWare, with iShare, with Crossroad, and we are picking one common language to describe those policy rules. We picked ODRL as the Open Digital Right language because it enables us to have permission, prohibition, duties to express a lot of detail in the rules to summarize contracts. And ODRL also has a lot of previous experience on the market. We can translate even a higher level description language to ODRL and from ODRL to lower level of language. So that's so far there is a strong consensus to use it.
Thank you so much.
And the final piece of information that I might share that will be for me a trigger. That's the federated catalogs, and that was highlighted also, I believe, before, to have discoverability of the data. Right now, there is a gravity effect around one or two catalogs providers. And I think that's something that we are implementing to have a federation of catalogs that synchronize themselves, synchronize the ID of the credentials, to be sorry, technically speaking, is the way forward to enable a true economy of data set that are properly described using ODRL, using RDF, and using this open world solution.
All right, thank you so much, Pierre, for these insights. I see now we can also see your presentation while you are sharing your screen. Thank you for that. As I already said, we will overcome the little connection difficulties by sharing this presentation with all the participants afterwards. May I now, in the context to have a discussion about indeed the data sharing framework, may I now have the pleasure to introduce our next guest, Isabella De Michelis, who is CEO and founder of EarningUp Limited, a small and medium innovator from Ireland. Isabella, may I come to you to enlighten us about the evolution that you see in the framework of data sharing in Europe, acknowledging already the insights that Pierre has kindly shared with us.
Thank you, Antonio, and hello to everybody. Are you hearing well? Is it sound okay?
Yes, very clear. Thank you, Isabella.
Good. Hello to everyone, and I'm going to spare you from slides, but of course, I'll be happy to eventually leave back a memo for future use and recall of this very interesting event. Few words about Ernie App. Ernie App is a small company that started back in 2017, 1 year before the entry into force of GDPR, to look at one specific enabler of data sharing, that is user confirming consent for specific purposes, and meaning by that, purposes of processing. That was a long time ago. That was when GDPR was all about privacy and digital sovereign policy did not yet existed. Today, we are in a very different environment, and Ernie App is here to say that notwithstanding all the data catalogs and notwithstanding all the data markets that will exist, and certainly at one point they will also consolidate, there is a fundamental issue with the price transparency of data that relates to who generates the data, because that transparency misses on the side who does that particular part in the value chain. And it may be a small company or it may be a user as a person. The reality is that until that transparency doesn't come up, it is very difficult to have a secondary data market for data. Because as we've heard from Nico's presentation, we can make a lot of assumptions on what are the factors that make the data more valuable. As we heard from Federico Milani, the European Commission is pushing for multiple uses of data and multiple ways for who owns and generates the data to control them. But as we heard from Pierre, we also need infrastructure, and we need secure interoperable infrastructure to make sure that the data will be exchanged, and as Nikos was saying, for a fair pricing. So that boils down to a very difficult recipe, because if in a market you have supply that it's not capable to orientate its pricing, demand side that does not know where to go to buy what it wants to buy, then we need to create a new trigger to help that fragmentation. And Ernie App vision is that that trigger comes from the consumers, comes from the users, comes from the every one person that every day interact with a machine, every time interact with a device. Every time that device is connected to the internet, it triggers and creates data. And those data flows in the market, but somehow it's difficult to trace them and it's difficult to price them. So our vision is to possibly inject a new parameter in the valuation of the data. And this is really also a challenge for Nikos, maybe if he wants to challenge me with a question later on, or even to Pierre, to see it from the transparency framework effort that GaiaX is putting up together to make sure that companies can exchange data under compliance. Our idea about a new parameter, a new valuation parameter for data, is the ability of the upstream data generator to assign a value to the purpose for which the data can be processed, and somehow pass on to the second stakeholder, third stakeholder, fourth stakeholder, a little bit with some kind of pass-through rights, evaluation that can either be for exclusive use or a non-exclusive use, but always tied back to a specific purpose. Are you listening me? I mean, is the voice still good? Because I've seen a little bit the line breaking down. Antonio, can you hear me?
Can you hear us, Isabella? Yes.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, I just want to be sure that we didn't get lost in transition. So I was saying, as it's so important to get the recipes together and having so many different players finding a common understanding as to what they are transacting, I think that it's really fundamental that the semantic comes along with a kind of harmonization and approximation. So taxonomy, lexicon, definitions, these are all tools that allows, if standardized, for the industry to be able to talk about the same thing. So when a catalog of a company is exposed and it has certain data under certain categorization, it needs to be comparable to the one of another size if it's the same data is ready for being shared or sold or exchanged. So this is a real call for the European Commission to look at it in the pragmatic way that if we are to think that the data marketplace is going to be successful, and I believe it is going to be successful, and if we believe that 2/3 of the data that go into the marketplaces are consumers generated, and I do believe that this is the case, and I do believe that anonymization is possible, but up to a certain limit. The only other way to handle the abundance of data in a way that it's fruitful to the secondary market is to have strong permission rights to be passed through the market. And that could possibly be the additional parameter that makes the price transparent. Because the data that is consented, and it's consented for a certain purpose, will be having a higher value than a data that it's not consented, or a data which has been collected historically for a certain purpose and can be reused for a different purpose may trigger a higher value for a different player than compared to the previous one, simply because the previous one was more interested in the historic and the second player is more interested in the dynamic usage of that data. And I really think that it's very difficult for the sellers to define those parameters. And it's really difficult for the buyers to imagine all the purposes that could possibly be exposed for determining what is the right price. So as a company, what we really like is A, that we're going to have data intermediaries being defined in the European market, because this allows clarity as to what companies do versus what they don't do. And brokering interests between parties, interest means beyond the data flows, it's interests. It's making the matchmaking. It's ensuring that the two sides of the market, the supply side and the demand side, they can have a place to talk to, cannot happen without some work around the semantic and the categorization of the data. And you know that it's difficult for the industry to do, but it's not impossible, because there are many data marketplaces and many data spaces that are trying to come up with some common framework. And framework also means common definitions, common taxonomy. I wouldn't say at all common pricing approaches. That's not interesting and not even attractive, because we want the market of data to be very liberal, very market driven, very free for small players to play with big players and with big players to play with other big players. So when I talk about pricing and I talk about market, it's really to think that we need a little bit, one or two more things than what we have today. That is the agility of the technology, that is the abundance of data, that is the ability to sign contracts that are, you know, between parties. So we may not even need a standard contractual clause for data sharing, but we definitively need to have a little bit of approximation for the catalogs and the access to the catalogs, because that will definitely have a positive impact on the pricing, because catalog means transparency. And if the catalogs are built on common taxonomy, that's going to be enhancing transparency. The more transparency there's in the data availability and the conditions to access and the conditions to share, the highest the chances to have a price that it's a real market price for supply and demand to make a contract. So EarlyApp, it's, and I conclude here, EarlyApp is a small company, but we are positioning ourselves as a data marketplace enabler because we are a consent management platform. That means that we enable the interested parties who are interested in a data transaction to rely on the appropriate level of permission, authorization, consents, including the pastoral rights, to create this fluidity of authorization that is dramatically necessary in a data market. And then we welcome very much solutions that, like the one that is coming from Nico's study as to what is the best way to price, but also the recommendation engine that has been developed by i3 Market. These are always welcome tools, but if they come just from the side of the industry, they're going to be missing on this qualifying event, qualifying data set that it's more belonging to the consumer as originator of the data. And so for those who are in the audience wondering how you then make the price for data transaction, we say it, apologies for simplifying a little bit, but we say if the user who has generated the data on a database is willing to transfer, to export, to reuse through other parties those data, that user, that person, that data subject should be able to qualify the future processing rights onto the other parties in a very simple way. And by doing it, he fixes the minimum prices for transactions. So you would not have the wholesale price, but you wouldn't have the resale price, but you would have the wholesale price, because the wholesale price would be the minimum price that someone would be exposing to be willing to exchange the data. And if that price is not matched, there's no transaction. So simply put, that's the only way to make the market transparent, is to consider the value chain wider than just being made by buyer and sellers. The value chain is made by every single individual that generates data and every single company or government that is interested in those data, but it needs to include in the value chain the user to be able to get it with the right authorization and the right permission. And right permission means valuation, and valuation means pricing. I'll stop here, and there were so many questions that while I was talking, I'm not sure that I picked them all, but I'm happy to take them all after.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Isabella, for sharing these insights also from the business development point of view. We have got immediately a question from you on whether in the platform you describe is the price of the data fixed, and how exactly the consent in terms of data sharing works. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, the simple answer is that the price is dynamic, because the price it's made through an auction. It's a reverse auction. The users push out the propensity of sharing, fixing a reserve price below which they will not share for any purpose the data. And on the other side of the platforms, you have the bidders who match the minimum reserve price for each and one type and category of data they are interested in. And then based on that match, the data subject will or will not give the data to one or more companies. So the price is not only dynamic, but it's real time and can definitively change, whether the purpose may be, let's say, programmatic, has a certain economics, machine learning may have a different one, product enhancement may have a different one. So the same data string can be sold for 3 different usages to 3 different companies, which each one is paying a different price, but it gets it with the right permission to use it. And so what it pays, it's really good. The user maximizes its assets, but the compliance is respected because the consent is traceable and its anonymity is protected by the data intermediary.
All right, thanks a lot to Isabella for elaborating on that and for this interesting insights you have experienced from the ground of an SME engaged in bringing innovation to the data marketplaces in Europe. And then when it comes to having putting all the different dots together and try to have a vision about data marketplaces, we are actually organizing this event as Digital SME in the context of a project, a European project that is I3M Market, and therefore I'm very happy to have here today as our next guest Martin Serrano, who is Senior Research Fellow on the I3 Market project in the context of the Insight Center for Data Analytics. So we have asked Martin to join us today to explain what are the concrete tools that are coming out as a result of this project, and that we would like to hear also in perspective to what we have just heard from Isabella and Pierre as tools that are being developed in practice to bridge all the various data spaces and marketplaces in Europe. Martin, over to you, and I believe you have already slides to share with us today.
Sure, thank you, Antonio, and everybody. So yeah, Martin Serrano is my name, and as mentioned by Antonio, I am based in Ireland as well as Isabel, and I work for the National University of Ireland, recently changed to University of Galway. And over the last 3 years, we have been coordinating this European project. And after listening carefully the presentation, the keynotes from Federico and from Nikos, I'm very glad that we have something to report here, because we have progress on those lines. And additionally to what Isabel and Pierre were explaining in high level, so we have some toolings to elaborate on a pragmatic point of view. So the project in itself is an open source project, and we are basically solving addressing one of the challenges in our data-driven society. I think there is no doubt that today the society is data-driven. The only problem, as was pointed several times during today, is that there is no a common model. There is not even a pricing model that is fixed or is dynamic, right? So there are multiple options in the market, or even on the analysis, as was presented by Nikos. So the idea here is that in this project we elaborate, or we redesign this data-centric model and have it in the data, the added value of the data modeling part. And here is when the semantics that were mentioned as a demand side are embedded. So we're using the ontology. We introduce our Casus model, which imply all the data life cycle by having the formalisms, the taxonomies that are relying not only as an invention. It comes from a W3C and from the DCAT, which is basically the European Union data model. So we're extending that standard to have more impact. So this is more or less the preamble for what we have today. But we need to understand as well that in I3 Market, we went beyond the data sovereignty because, as you know, data consumers always look for better services. I mean, you might remember those times, early times, when you give your data away, your personal data, names, email, address, location, for just having Wi-Fi internet or for having access in the internet. So this is kind of a trade-off between better services and data consumers. But then obviously the data producers look for financial benefits. And everything is fine in this symbiosis until there is an imbalance, right? Because when the data producers becomes to get more financial benefits, obviously the services needs to be better. But if there is no better services, of course, the data consumers will start to complain about these relationships. And of course, I3 Market came to support this new paradigm. So this new data economy paradigm. How we are doing it? Obviously, we are not an holistic approach. We did an elicitation set of requirements based or very similar to what has been done in other projects. We just rely on the industrial experience, and we rely also in create co-creation workshops with Digital SME as a coordinator of all these workshops and all these stakeholders. So we amalgamate all these requirements, and we ended up having this exchangeable adaptability or adaptable, open, adaptive, self-descriptive, scalable, secure, extensible, self-contained, and structural requirements for a single digital market. Obviously, not all of them can be deployed in once, but what we did, we elaborate in three kind of steps our solution. Now, we need to understand as well that the supply side and the demand side are dynamic. So they evolve from day to day. So from databases, data warehouses, data lakes, and data hubs, we can have multiple marketplaces. And this image illustrates what is happening now. So what we are living today. But this is in somehow contradictory or very disruptive, far away from what we are expecting from the European Union. So we are looking for a common framework, for a common single digital market that can elaborate multiple marketplaces to exchange or to even interconnect data sets or data assets in this world. So under the umbrella of transparency, under the umbrella of building trusted economy and having a large ecosystem of this single digital market. The good news is that IT Market has provided some tools. So we didn't build a marketplace, not yet another marketplace. Why? Because there are some in there, and they will continue the expansion and the growing of them. But the idea in here is to provide the tools that will facilitate this transparency and this trustability and this ecosystem creation by having obviously blockchain as the distributed ledger for consent, by having these self-sovereign tools for what we call the privacy and security by design, and then by having the interoperability aspects and data sharing for this enlargement of the ecosystem. Obviously, not everybody has to comply with this, but the more the ecosystem comply, the more the demand size will satisfy. And we did it in 3 phases to precisely kind of engage with the ecosystem and teach them and somehow our experience, which is basically build the version 1 with a secure and trusted solution. Then we rely or we deploy this one in a cloud deployment or distributed environment. And then we continue the support by including even the pricing tool that was mentioned before. And this operable is online and it's a recommendation pricing tool. And now we have this tool particularly looks not only for few elements, we look for multiple elements that has come from this illicit requirements collection. And then we ended up by having the release 3, which is at the end of the project in the next month, that we will have this intelligent, interoperable, and integrative. So at the end, everything is released as an open source. As you know, many of the industries, many of the SMEs are now relying in open source to even elaborate beyond the products that they have released. Now, last but not least, we have this from left to right, the evolution, because we care about the industry. It's not true or it's not certainly accurate that industry leads because they pay for the data. Customers or individuals will not pay high amount of data, but what we can provide is this data and participate in this new data economy schema. So the industrial innovation will come because they will pay for it, and the fairness and the distribution of the capital will be more fair amongst the participants, right? So that will be not necessary to have everyone involved, because many people might say, I don't care about the data, I will not request anything as a premium, but as far as I get better services, I will be satisfied on that. It's similar to what you pay for the electricity or some supply services, that if you pay a flat fare per month or per year, you don't care if there's variations or there is prices up and down. So there will be different models. So there will not be one fixed model. And we also analyze these 5 different types of premiums or fees or different dynamics, so like dynamic pricing. It was mentioned already, this kind of a dynamic pricing by having reverse offers and reverse pricing. So all these are considerations that we have already in our model. And in somehow it's tested, it works. So we put it in 3 industrial applications in different domains also to see the flexibility and the viability of our tools. And we also facilitate it by having an SDK, software development kit, and a reference implementation for people how they can see how this work. Obviously, we have also more technical elements by having Docker Compose APIs, but this is for more advanced developers that they want to go into deep onto the technology. But so far, so good. We have these three elements from a technology perspective. Everything accessible via GitLab and via GitHub. So we also managed to have the two largest communities in open source, and it's synchronized. So any change or any commit in one of the communities goes into the other community. We have our portal, we have our open source community. During COVID times, it was very difficult to organize events, but then we innovate by having also our portal open source, and then it's accessible. And we have virtual trainings, we have virtual booths, and all the material is there. And last but not least, we also have what we call the public repositories when the code can be downloaded. So obviously, it's in a very short, in a nutshell, what is IT Market. But I invite you to visit our repositories, our training material in YouTube, our developers portal. And if you have any questions, of course, I will be here for answering and open the discussion as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Martin, for sharing these insights. I already have an immediate question coming from our guest, Nikos.
Yes. Okay. Thanks for the presentation, Martin. I just wanted to ask whether you are providing in the framework any tools for guarding ownership, let's say. I mean, if somebody sells a data set, and then there is a buyer that buys the data set at a retail market price, let's say, are there any, does the platform guarantee that the buyer cannot come back and resell the data set at a lower price, let's say, and undercut the original owner? I mean, do you have any tools or any ideas on how to, avoid somebody creating a copy of the data set and then giving it for free and then destroying the market for whoever collected in the first place? I'm asking this thing because it's a second area beyond pricing that is of interest to me.
Yes, no, definitely we have a regulatory framework and it's attached to the smart contracts. So we have a smart contract generator that attach all the regulations and all the conditions, right? Obviously, as an owner of the data or as a provider of the data, when you describe and you register your data in a marketplace, you put these regulations upfront. Obviously, there is no other mechanisms apart of the blockchain to validate the smart contract and the wallet for payments and transactions. But if you copy or you violate these smart contract regulations, then you will be, let's say, entitled for some fines or some penalizations. But there is no way to trace back the actions. But in order to see copies or replications of the datasets, then we rely on these blockchain mechanisms to see the consent and the validation form. So basically, if someone transfer a dataset or resell the dataset, they will not have this certificate or this consents that obviously will invalidate this process in some audits or in some processes that might be applicable. It's like paying your taxes, right? Nobody be behind you until you are kind of audited. And if you have a copies of you have unlicensed products, this is when you get penalized. But there is no technologically we didn't implement, and probably it's very difficult to have now something that restricts the copy of the datasets. But at least the regulatory framework we implemented and it's there as a smart contract attached to the wallet.
Okay, thank you. I mean, this solving this problem is a very, in general, outside the platform, it's like this is a data provenance problem. It's a very hard, probably impossible to solve problem.
Yes. I mean, we see NFCs as well, how they work, right? So it's a digital stamp, digital signature, but nobody impede to copy and reproduce and circulate, but there will be only one copy, which is the one certified amongst all the copies that might exist. So this is something that we need to live with in a digital environment or digital.
Just a last copy. I mean, with my teams, one of my PhD students is developing watermarking techniques to basically put a watermark on the data set to make it more accountable, whoever touches the data set. So if you find it later on, you know who leaked it and so on, which is an interesting area. And if you guys care, I'd love to tell you more at some other.
Sure. I mean, this project is not gonna be ending at the end of May, because we have other projects that will give a continuation. let's try to also build some collaborations for students or even researchers or even new proposals coming on. I will be in contact with you.
Absolutely. We're more than happy also to continue this exchange even in possible next editions of this discussion, because indeed the core purpose of this session and the discussion we are having is also trying to understand where SME fit into this picture and how they can be embedded in a market that creates opportunities to attain the goal of interoperability and ultimately also responds to the overarching goal that is coming from the European Union to achieve on the basis of European-led innovation the target of digital sovereignty. So perhaps coming back to you, Martin, also taking into account the insights that we received from Pierre and Isabella, how do you feel that the IT market solutions fit within the space of growing marketplaces in Europe, and in particular, how the approach of IT market fit with the Gaia-X framework, especially, and of course, then I will go to Pierre to hear from him as well about this.
Sure. I mean, in short, as I mentioned, I am very glad that Isabella mentioned this semantic part, because this is one of our pillars. And I think semantic interoperability has demonstrated not only at the semantic web the flexibility and the power of that, but also at the IoT and in the AI, how this data can be exchangeable, can be interoperable, right? So I think this is a key factor. And because we already implement this one based on standards, and even better, we promote standards in the communities, I think that will be a way to consolidate our IT market approach. And it's called OCASUS because it comes from ontology for collecting, accessing, storage, and selling data, right? Using and selling data. So it has all the full life cycle and all the data flows that are required for any marketplace. Now, how SMEs in particular will onboard this process? I think we also developed the onboarding process, which is also a tutorial, and we have the mechanisms to facilitate that SMEs either develop their own marketplace based on our tools, or if they already have adopted a marketplace, they can extend it and they can adapt it with our toolings to be compliant either for smart contracts or either for data exchange or even for cross-domain, or what we call now in modern times federated marketplaces. I think this is a very interesting work done in this project, not from a marketplace perspective, but more from a backplane support that can facilitate SMEs or large industries or entrepreneurs to expand and to scale up their solution, right? With the purpose and the objective to engage stakeholders, which are basically data owners, and at the same time distribute the royalties, right? Obviously, that doesn't mean that if you are the owner, you will have 50%. That means depends on the processing that I do to your data, depends on the contract relationship, depends on the pricing model, depends on the cost model of the processing. There are many variations, like in any marketplace, right? So in here we're not talking about goods, so we're talking about data sets, but the pricing model, the process are quite similar. And depends on the evolution of the markets, this pricing can change or can evolve in different ways. And in relation to Gaia-X, which I will pass to Pierre, in the very beginning of Gaia-X, we were reading the specifications. We attend 2 or 3 workshops, and we contribute to the specification as well in terms of architecting the pillars. I think we are compliant. Obviously, there is no certification process in terms of Gaia-X, but all the IT market implementation and all the IT market connectors, in our case, are core APIs, but it's open API standard terminology. But all our connectors can be compliant, it's a matter of just transforming the vocabulary, but it's based on Gaia-X. And we are prepared for intelligent solutions, so that's why we are fully compliant on that. I leave to Pierre because all these pillars and all these areas in Gaia-X are crucial to be understood if someone wants to adopt Gaia-X and at the same time be compliant with IT market, or the other way around, adopt IT market and be compliant with Gaia-X.
Thanks a lot, Martin. Pierre, over to you. Can you comment on Martin's insights? And also, perhaps, could I ask you to tell us how SMEs can also benefit from the solutions such as the Gaia-X trust framework that are basically becoming a benchmark even beyond Europe for data spaces.
So I thank you very much for the presentation because I found that very useful, and I must say that the quality of the exchange that we have today is bringing some face in it. So that I'm very happy. We are in Gaia-X on Gaia-X side also adopting the very same standard that other initiatives are using. For example, you mentioned DCAT. We know that from Gaia-X side, for example, we use DCAT v3. We know that the European Commission is using DCAT AP, which is based on DCAT v2. But overall, the strategy and the intent are very well aligned, I will say. You've mentioned the semantic match. Again, that's something that is critical. Many of our members are expecting to be compliant or not compliant and are living a bit in a binary world. I don't believe that it's going to work. We are in an area where we need to have different levels of autonomies. You have technical autonomy, operational autonomies, legal autonomy, and this is this semantic match. We are turning that into an index of how semantically speaking you are interoperable with the others.
Yes.
Because we cannot force the industry to start declaring their services the way an association or an initiative wants. However, we could provide a tool to measure how interoperable, semantically speaking, a service or a data set is with the others. And it will be in the interest of the market then to converge. The SMEs, I know that the SMEs in Europe are very flexible and they can adapt quickly. The big players, hyperscalers outside of Europe will take more time. And this is I believe in European companies' interest to make sure that we are enabling those KPIs. And you mentioned also blockchain.
Yes, please.
This is something that in Gaia-X we use without saying that we will use it.
Yes.
The reason is that when I'm mentioning blockchain, it scares people like hell. What about proof of work? What about energy consumption? What about the fees? What about the regulation? My company cannot buy crypto assets. My company cannot buy payment token. So it scares a lot, and usually the discussion are very focused then on all the phones. So we prefer to talk about decentralized database with the capacity to run code, which is exactly a blockchain, but without mentioning it's a blockchain. And true. we do have a compliance schema. So this is something that is fairly recent. The trust framework document that you've mentioned has been translated into source code. So I hired developer within the team. So the Gaia-X staff has developer now. And we made an implementation of the trust framework. So we are able to issue Gaia-X compliant credentials. And this is something that we will do. We have a big event in Bilbao next week, the TechX event, and we will have workshops and presentation about that.
Thank you very much, Pierre. May I go then over to Isabella to ask her also, given that these technologies are on the market, how SMEs and SMEs like the one you lead can benefit from these solutions, and also when it comes to the consent, data sharing consent, do you think that these solutions can address some of the challenges that SME may experience when they develop such type of innovation based on data?
Well, I think that, and this is really a broad question, but Europe is made of zillions of small, medium-sized companies, but each one is probably very differently equipped to implement the digital transformation. So If we look at data sharing and the opportunity offered by data marketplaces and data spaces, it's a big topic for an SME. And clearly, the more competition that there is between vendors, which offers solution to be part of a data marketplace or to be part of a data space, it's very welcome. Because if the barrier to entry are high due of price or complexity of deployed technologies, well, I totally hear and understand what goes back to was said before by Pierre, that companies are scared about investments that firm them up in decisions that are then difficult to change. So in terms of opportunities, the opportunities are there, but there are also costs. One of the costs that is rarely mentioned in debates around how to make it happen, data marketplaces, and how to make it happen, data spaces, is the risk and the cost of non-compliance, which to me and a company like mine that is pretty much focused on compliance, it's pretty significant how distracted the SMEs, as much as the big companies are, with how much do I need to comply with compliance for making data sharing happening. And I really believe that there is a conundrum here that needs to be taken very seriously by companies. Until and when privacy and data protection in Europe is going to be perceived as compliance, we are a little bit in the corner, because the reality is that it is an opportunity. The more consented processes, the more consents are confirmed, the higher the value and the wider the monetization rights that goes with data. So we should not be forgetting that while it is true that GDPR was primarily looking at personal data, the new regulations that are coming from the European institutions are pretty much wide in scope. They touches upon a wide variety of data that ranges from metadata to Internet of Things data. And it is very risky, if we look at these opportunities of data markets, to continue look at privacy and data protection in the context of data marketplaces and data spaces purely as compliance. So what I really welcome is that, by creating these events where there is a little bit more of interactive conversation rather than just presentation, ideas can be put on the table. And I really, really welcome what Federico Milani said at the beginning of the event when he talked about this event in June that they are organizing for bringing a little bit of clarity into the market as to what data intermediary do. Because data intermediary will be facilitators, there will be enablers, and they will be brokering two parties of the market that may or may not talk to each other. But without the infrastructure of initiatives like, many data spaces in Europe are already being deployed. But without a kind of approximation, not only in technologies, but I would say more on processes, well, it's difficult to build an internal market that is really big in that sense, as the European Commission wants to build, that is the digital sovereignty market. So the freedom of companies to choose the technologies they prefer, that's fundamental. Technology neutrality has always been paramount in Europe. We like that. Even if we are a small company, we support that. But small companies need to have less fragmentation. And to have less fragmentation, you need to work a little bit on harmonization. And to achieve harmonization fast, you need to come up with ideas from the market that can glue into some kind of convergence. So there cannot be too many initiatives, and these initiatives cannot be too different, because otherwise it takes too long to take the opportunity for real.
Thanks a lot, Isabella. And on this very interesting point, I'm looking forward to give the floor to our next speaker, Sharon Donog from the European Commission. Before I go there, may I suggest that we take all, even online, a good 5 minutes break to grab a coffee, because we are going over to a very interesting discussion about one topic that Isabella rightly mentioned about the importance in all this discussion of data protection. So indeed, looking forward to give the floor to Sharon and to other three distinguished guests that I'm also looking forward to introduce to all of you. I suggest we convene here at 5 to 4 p.m., so in about 5 minutes, so we can resume our discussion. Thank you so much to all the speakers that have intervened so far and for the very good discussion that you have triggered. So we are back online, ladies and gentlemen. I'm looking forward to our continuation of the discussion we had so far. And that is why I would like to give the floor to our next speaker, that is Cheyenne Dono, Legal and Policy Officer at the Data Protection Unit in DigiJust at the European Commission. And I'm looking forward to hear from Cheyenne his insights into the European vision for data protection and data sharing coexistence in our European Union.
Thanks very much. So I'd like to just start with some brief remarks about the, I think, very reasonable question of how all of these new initiatives in the area of data, such as the Data Governance Act and the Data Act, how they interact with the GDPR and what the relevance of the GDPR is here. And I suppose to start off, just to make the general point that all of these pieces of legislation pursue very particular aims. And I think Isabella correctly made the point that they also deal with, in most cases, both personal and non-personal data. The Data Act, for example, which Federico spoke about, concerns fair access to and the use of data. With the GDPR, as it's in the name, it's a general data protection regulation. It's a horizontal regulation, and it always applies to the processing of personal data in the EU. And nothing about these new initiatives changes that. Whenever you want to do anything with personal data in the EU, any processing of personal data has to be done in compliance with the GDPR, and that remains the case following these initiatives. Now, with that being said, there are elements of these initiatives, for example, the Data Act, which complement or build on the GDPR in particular ways. So, for example, to speak about the Data Act, which is about fair access to and use of data and who can generate value from data, there are provisions in there which you'll be aware of concerning the use of data generated by connected devices. And the aim of these provisions is really to ensure that a lot of the valuable data generated by the connected device can be accessed by the user and also can be ported to a third party. Now, you might wonder, why do we need this? Because we have in the GDPR a right to data portability. Well, this portability right in the Data Act complements what we have in the GDPR, but it doesn't replace it. It's additional in the particular circumstance of Internet of Things and connected devices. But crucially, this portability right only applies upon the request of the data user. So again, the fundamental principle of the GDPR, that the data subject is in control of his or her own personal data, is completely preserved. Where a data user makes a request to a data holder to port their personal data, that data holder is under an obligation pursuant to the Data Act to port that data where applicable continuously and in real time and without any cost to the data user to a third party. Now, the Data Act doesn't provide a legal basis for the third party to process that personal data. That third party still needs a legal basis under the GDPR. So, for example, if I, as a data subject ask for my data to be ported to a third party, it may be the case that I have a contract with that third party to provide products and services to me. In that case, that would be the legal basis under the GDPR. The Data Act doesn't provide that legal basis. I think this is the important point to remember in relation to these rights in the Data Act, that they complement and sit on top of what's in the GDPR, but the necessity for a legal basis under the GDPR still applies. To speak then very briefly about the Data Governance Act. The same principle applies here. The Data Governance Act provides a framework for governance of data, to increase the availability of data for use and to encourage voluntary sharing of data. It doesn't provide a legal basis for the processing of personal data. So, for example, the provisions in the Data Governance Act on the use of public sector data concern the conditions for the reuse of public sector data, but there still needs to be a legal basis, whether in law or a contract, for example, for the data that's accessed, public sector data that's accessed, to be processed. Similarly, for data intermediation services, this concerns really the modalities to ensure that data is reused in a safe environment. But again, these data intermediation services, they may facilitate the exercise by a data subject of his or her rights, but they don't provide a legal basis for the data intermediation services to actually process data or transmit the personal data of data subjects. I think I will leave my remarks there for now, but happy to take any questions that any of you have.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I think you already touched upon some quite impactful topics for our community of SME innovators that really need to rely as well. And I'm thinking about the Provision and Data Act on the availability of data as a source of innovation for the solutions that they provide. So could I perhaps ask you to elaborate a little bit more in detail on this interplay that you also mentioned between the legal basis of the GDPR and the provision contained into the Data Act when it comes for the subject to share data and even claim, when it comes to the business-to-business data sharing, the possibility to claim for compensation for those who share this type of data.
Yeah, sure, no problem. I think if you could just mute the microphone, there's a bit of an echo, at least for me.
All right, look into.
Great, perfect, thank you. Yeah, so as I said, in the GDPR, we already have a portability right for data subjects, but this applies only for where the processing of personal data is based on particular legal basis. The kind of super portability right we have in the Data Act applies to this particular situation where data is generated by connected devices and it's detached from the particular legal base for which the data is processed. So it applies to any data that's processed. Now, this data sharing can only be triggered by the request of a data user. So the data user is in control. Now, when the data user makes a request under the Data Act for data to be shared with a third party, the data holder is under a legal obligation under the Legal Act. So the legal basis for sharing the data with that third party is a legal obligation in the sense of the GDPR. In terms of the use of the data by the third party, that third party will need its own legal basis under the GDPR. That could be, for example, a contract it has with the data user. If I, as a data user, requested a data holder to port my personal data, it may be that I'm entering into a contract with the third party for which the processing of that personal data will be necessary. In terms of compensation, the data subject cannot be charged anything for the porting of personal data in this way under the Data Act. The compensation can be claimed by the data holder, who of course makes some investment in the personal data, transmits the personal data to the third party, and this data holder can claim compensation for this, which makes sense because of the cost involved in doing that. But the Data Act regulates the compensation. It has to be proportionate, in particular where I think there's a particular provision where the data is shared with an SME. The compensation claimed by the data holder for the transmission of this data pursuant to the request of the data user can't exceed the costs that are directly associated with actually facilitating the making available of that data. I hope that was clear.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Cheyenne. And indeed, the topic also of looking into the legal framework when it comes to the sharing of personal data has led us to invite into this discussion our next speakers. And indeed, we are very happy to have with us today Maria Papafilippou, Cybersecurity Officer from the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity. And indeed, Maria, we are very keen on hearing from you about the cybersecurity for personal data sharing engineering, especially for the importance that this has when applied to specific context and vertical sector, such as the healthcare sector. Looking forward to hearing your insights. Over to you, Maria.
Hello, thanks for the introduction, Antonio, and thank you for inviting Enisa and myself to participate in this very interesting discussion. First of all, just in case you're not familiar with Enisa, and it's the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, and I work in the Policy Development and Implementation Unit within Enisa. So today I'll try to discuss a little bit the cybersecurity opportunities and challenges in data sharing in the context of the healthcare sector, and maybe to outline some of Enisa's activities relevant to that. So the key policy developments were mentioned earlier by Kieran. I will focus more on the cybersecurity specific policy developments. So first of all, it's the NIS directive and the upcoming Cyber Resilience Act. And of course, the EU health data space. There's the medical devices regulation as well. Some of them are focused more on cybersecurity. Some of them do not include specific cybersecurity provisions. But there are many relevant requirements, and many of them include clauses relevant to incident reporting, information sharing, vulnerability disclosure, and of course, this entails some data sharing. Just to illustrate a bit how Enisa works, the NIS defines the essential sectors as critical infrastructure sectors, and the NIS requirements apply, of course, to all entities classified as essential and important. So each sector has a different level of maturity and criticality. There are different technology needs and therefore different trends, let's say, within each sector. So the health sector is of high priority for Enisa because it was classified as a sector with low maturity, cybersecurity maturity and of high criticality. So we have many activities that I will go through later to increase the cybersecurity maturity in the sector. As mentioned earlier, one important initiative is the EU health data space, which is in proposal stage. The EHDS aims to create a secure cross-border exchange of health data in the EU, specifically for health data. The current draft includes cybersecurity requirements, specifically for healthcare record systems. On the other hand, the Cyber Resilience Act will cover digital products. So the EU health data space will introduce requirements for electronic health record systems, and it's expected to address the gaps in the NIS directive and the medical devices regulation as well. So Enisa has collected information from many sources. Currently, as per the latest report about the engineering of personal data sharing, the current data sharing practices in health, this report focused a bit on the health sector. So the current sharing practices relate to either user-controlled personal data sharing, which require users to explicit consent. The data shared by healthcare providers for medical and research purposes, such as diagnosis, treatment, medical research, and so on. And data sharing using third-party services, which is the data shared as part of another process or service, and maybe processed through secondary channels. So this is just to provide some background information on the current practices on the sharing of information. However, the health sector is a bit tricky due to the use of many interconnected devices, many technologies. So again, we have collected information from many sources about the key cybersecurity challenges in the sector, which relate to ransomware, data breaches, supply chain attacks. There's low cybersecurity maturity in the sector. There's a lack of security awareness most of the times. Many legacy systems are used within the sector, and of course, there's shortage in cybersecurity skills. So this is an overview of the challenges and maybe threats relating to the sector, which was also confirmed by the ENISA threat landscape in 2022, I think, and the incidents reported by the member states during the past 3 years. The sector is one of the most targeted and impacted sector with regards to cybersecurity incidents. So I have created the background now, I think, with the challenges, but there are many opportunities in data sharing as well. Such initiatives might provide large and diverse data sets and facilities, of course, for research, business, government, security, and even social applications. And due to this need, there's this EU data strategy, the Data Governance Act, the Data Act that are being discussed right now. And of course, these initiatives will benefit citizens and businesses in general. Such applications could improve, we hope they could improve healthcare services. They could create even a safer and cleaner transport systems, for example. They could generate new products and services. They could even reduce the cost of services and maybe improve the sustainability of and energy efficiency, which is currently a big issue. So
thanks a lot, Maya. Perhaps what you are touching upon is very interesting when it comes to the techniques that also ENISA is basically guiding to use and can be used also by the operators, the economic operators that deal with the sharing of personal data. In particular, we know that ENISA recently published a working paper on personal data sharing in the context of care, and that contains very useful insights to some use cases around the anonymization of this data that can be very helpful. Now, also from the experience of our member, ENISA in other contexts in the past has issued very useful guidance to SMEs to comply with the cybersecurity standards. Do you think that when it comes to the developments you are acknowledging when it comes to personal data sharing, there will be guidelines to be issued by ENISA as well in that field and to what extent do you think that this type of guidelines should become mandatory?
Well, ENISA issues guidelines on a number of topics, and of course, data sharing is a big issue. Currently, we do support cybersecurity aspects of privacy and data protection. And through this report, we have demonstrated use cases on how specific techniques could be used. We're also working on the notion of data spaces and the engineering of these relatively new concepts to ensure data protection. We do understand that privacy experts and maybe national authorities are already analyzing the data and the information, on the data protection considerations, but it's yet unclear for ENISA whether there will be specific guidelines. The guidance always comes handy, of course, but the general security principles always apply.
Great. Then we will be for sure following with great interest the developments in this area that will be coming from ENISA. Thank you very much for this insight, Maria. I'm then going to our next guest that we would like to welcome today. I'm pleased to introduce Christian Linder from the Deutsches Zentrum für Luft- und Raumfahrt. And I hope my German pronunciation got your organization name well, but just in case, it's the German Aerospace Center, and we are very keen on hearing from you the standards and the solution that you are developing when it comes to indeed our benchmark of data spaces coming from Germany. Over to you, Christian. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, your German was really excellently pronounced. So congratulations to this. It was very good. I'm very sorry for having this German in the slides. So basically, I'm a team leader here at the German Aerospace Center, a very large research center in Germany. And I am part of an institute that focuses on mobility research. And I would like to share a couple of insights, what is going on in the mobility sector, in Gaia-X and in data spaces and federated technologies as such. But first of all, I would like to thank everybody for being invited to this panel. I'm replacing here a gentleman who is called Bert Verdonk. He is working in the Luxembourg Ministry for, I guess, healthcare, and he is, he's working in the health industry. And I would like to pass over his greetings. So thank you very much for having this and introducing myself. What is happening in the German mobility research arena and in the automotive industry and in the rail industry in mobility as such? As you know, data spaces and federated technologies is a very hot topic right now in a lot of industries. And the industries are pursuing this issue in different speeds. And my observation is that mobility is one of the main drivers of it. And that is simply because there is so much funding in it. I would like to give you an insight of just two big projects that are happening here in Germany. The first one is a set of projects. It's a project family, which is called Gaia-X for Future Mobility. And within this umbrella, we have 6 nationally funded projects by the German Ministry of Economics. And these projects focus on 2 things: on developing the Gaia-X technology as such in an agnostic way, so without looking at the mobility domain as such. So we're working on, let's say, for sovereign identities, we're looking for connectors and all these kinds of components that you technologically need to set up a data space. And on the other hand, we have a set of use cases that we're looking in. And these use cases are from the automotive industry, and they range from autonomous driving to the production of automotive parts like brakes, lights, seats, steerings, and stuff like that. So we're looking from the shop floor and production to the end product and trying to find out whether Gaia-X or federated technologies as such are useful and what we can use them for and how we can proceed with it. This project family has a funding of 135 million euros, and that is one of the smaller initiatives here. So there is a lot of money, a lot of people, 80 companies are involved in it, and it's more than 10,000 person months here. Engineers are working on this and pursuing things forward. Gaia-X for Future Mobility became Lighthouse Project, by the way, in the Gaia-X AISBL. Pierre might know the initiative. However, so this is one big thing that we're working on. I'm heavily involved in these projects. Yesterday, I've been on an event to discuss the current status. If anybody wants to have insights in this, in the progress of these projects, you can just ask me. The second big thing that is happening in the mobility sector in Germany is an initiative which is called Catena-X. You might have heard of that. Catena-X is again a very huge and very successful initiative that is again funded, so very well funded. It is, I think, more than 350 million euros of funding in total in it. So just these two initiatives is 500 million of research that goes into data spaces and data space technology as such, while Catena is more focusing on tailoring the technology down for usage in mobility. Okay, so while in Gaia-X, which is the right approach, don't get me wrong, while in Gaia-X the technology is being described as agnostic as possible, so you can use it in healthcare, mobility, finance, everywhere, Catena is focusing on, if we have a general data space, how can we tailor this down to be used in mobility? And that is a very successful path these guys are pursuing right now. Here it comes into place the trust framework, for instance, where you can define and configure the details of what rules are being applied within one data space or within one federation. And of course, the market is regulated to a certain extent, and the data space as such should respect that. If you look at other industries, like let's say, for instance, defense or healthcare or food, you will find regulated markets here as well. And I hope that these markets can learn how to tailor their own data spaces from the mobility sector. So, okay, so that is just a quick overview of what is happening here. And I would like to share a couple of observations that I have looking at these big initiatives. And I would like to distribute 3 different, let's say, streamings within, so with what's happening here. And at the end, I would like to derive chances that arise for small and medium enterprises from this. So my observation is that the mobility and especially the automotive industry is looking at data spaces as such to use them for 3 different things. The first is, they have internal processes, like, so you have big companies like Audi or Peugeot or whoever, and of course they are so large, they have some kind of administration processes. And what they have right now is they have put a lot of these processes, internal processes, into the cloud. And with having the hyperscalers in the United States, lots of this data is in the United States now. And with the last administration, the Trump administration, a lot of trust was lost in Europe towards what's happening in the United States. And I know of meetings that the German railway CEO has. So the German Minister of Economics, he asked him to join a meeting, and there he was asked to explain how dependent the company already is from American technology. So one very important use case here, and that's true for the automotive industry as well, is, so how dependent is Europe, or how dependent are large-scale European companies from technology providers that are outside of Europe? And that is the first use case where data spaces play a big role because of all these nice attributes you gain from, you can describe that European law has to be applied in this data set. So as a policy for this data set, data space, for instance, and a couple of other things. So that's the first one. The second one is data spaces are going to be used in supply chains that already exist. Imagine you are a car manufacturer and you want to build a car. What are you doing? You're not building everything on your own. So you're building some parts and the rest is being ordered. So you say the guy, deliver me a seat. Then the next guy says, okay, someone delivers the clothes, someone delivers the cushions, I put it together, and so on. You all know how supply chains work. But the point here is that these supply chains already exist. And all the data that is being exchanged along this supply chain is mostly exchanged by proprietary data sets, by already, established connections in between well-known suppliers and consumers of these goods and for the data respectively. And data spaces are here used not so much because of a sovereignty aspect in it. That's a nice kind of thing, but there are other things in data spaces that are really relevant here. So if you want a supply chain to work perfectly, you need it to be interoperable, to be traceable. You need it to be open, using open data standards, all these kind of things. So these aspects are very important here in this use case, where already existing business cases are being optimized along the supply chain. This, for instance, is what Catena-X, this 350 million euro thing, flagship, is focusing specifically on. So what they want to do is they want to enhance the supply chain. And that gets us to the third category, and that is the most interesting one here in this discussion, and that is the usage of data in an open market on capitalizing data that these companies already have and making them to money. And here the big chances and the big hurdles come up. So the data that already exists in the companies don't, so I'd say it straight away, the companies don't want to share it because of what we heard in the talks that we had in this event here. Nobody can really tell you how valuable these data sets are. So if you would be able to have a price tag on it and say, okay, Audi or Volkswagen, you're sitting on a data set that is valuable 15 billion, I don't know, then people would consider, okay, we sell it, because selling and giving a data set away has an inherent risk that someone could derive IP from it. So for instance, if you have the temperature of a brake, then some engineer could find out how this brake is constructed, what material is used or whatever. And that's why they're so reluctant, because they have the risk of someone deriving IP from it. While at the same time, they have not really an idea how valuable this data is. And that is why they say, okay, better not. So what they're not doing is, what they're not yet doing is, they are very reluctant, or they don't want to share data because they see, they over-anticipate the risk that is inherent in here. The next category of data, and that is the interesting one, is the data that comes from the cars during the operation after the sales, okay? So if you create a car and the car is floating around in the traffic, then this car produces data. And there is a big political fight about who owns the data and who can then capitalize on the data and all these sort of things. And we are very key. So me personally, as a researcher, of course, I look at the chances, right? So we have a lot of research projects that have use cases. For instance, we call them collective vision. So all the cars in a city are collecting data, and you can, for instance, sense empty parking lots within a 5-second interval, for instance. So you can say, okay, there is a parking lot, it's free, so you can go there by sensing it in another car. But the question is, who owns the data. So who can say, so this data set is mine and I'm selling it to someone who's willing to pay, maybe to find out where a free parking lot is, for instance, right? And these are big hurdles. And I somehow lost the political process from my radar. So my information might be, there might be a solution already, so which I missed so far. But that is some hurdle that people are, that makes people still reluctant on, using this kind of data and coming up with business models like these. Another problem is that the technologically access to the data of floating cars is not realized yet. So if you buy a car, it does not naturally have an over-the-air interface where you can download the data from. So you need to be a car manufacturer or a car genius engineer. So you have to open up the car and find the right cables to connect. You need a laptop with a very specified, so it's very hard to get the data from a car. And that is another thing that makes the whole process really tricky, because if you want an interface like that, that means someone needs to invest in it, okay? So you would need to go to the people and say, invest in an over-the-air interface to make someone download the data, so someone is investing in it without a return of invest. So the guy who is developing the interface doesn't get any from the sales that comes from this data. So we don't have yet understood how data from mobility, from the automotive, I'm just talking about automotive sector, so public transport may be different, but just the automotive sector, we still have not understand not just how much money we can make with the data, not just whose money is it, yeah, who belongs to the data, so whose data is that, but even if everybody was willing to, we don't have cooperation modes now. For a customer that buys a car, so imagine you buy a Volkswagen, so it's yours. The car is gone for Volkswagen. They don't know, so they know that they sold it to you, but from that moment it's gone. What you would need is you would need a connection back home, remain the status of the car, the data of the status to the manufacturer, so that the manufacturer can have a contractual relationship to you to agree how to sell data. And we have still not figured out how that works. So you see, we have a lot of hurdles here and problems. And because I'm an optimistic person, I don't want to talk about hurdles and problems. Missing concepts, problems, missing entities that take care of it creates a vacuum. And this is all a chance for small and medium enterprises, because we need people, we need companies that solve these problems, right? Or in other words, to make money with this. Because what I see from the discussion with the car manufacturers is they say, hey, Chris, you know what? I understand all of what you say, but the trouble is we are car makers. We understand that we sit on a bunch of data that someone else can make money with. Okay, fair enough. We have tried to figure out how to make money with it on our own, but it is so complicated and there is no infrastructure that we can rely on. So there is not really a big network of companies that we can go to and say, hey, we have this data. Could you please commercialize this data for us? Okay, there are some, okay, there are startups, but there is not a large scale industry that you can address. So that's what they tell me. And then they say, and that is because we simply don't. All right. And this is where the big chances arise for small, medium enterprises. Go into the play, offer this to these people, and you can be part of the game. Yeah, and you can be part of the game here. So what can we conclude from what I've trying to share with you? So what's going on in the automotive industry or in the mobility sector right now is, first of all, customization of data spaces is a big technological aspect of what they're working on. Other sectors can learn from it. Please do that. At the same time, the data space core services are developed further, because even though you have a customized data space, you need the core services to work, and that's why they're putting some effort in developing these further too. For instance, the Eclipse data space components are subject to development in Catena-X, for instance. But what we also need is we need to find a mindset to sell data like apples, right? So you have a data set and you want to sell it on a market like you sell an apple, and we don't have that yet. And we need support. We need people who understand that. We need people like we heard of today driving this Ernie app. So I was completely fascinated. We need these kind of people and this kind of mindset in the mobility sector, and it's not present yet. The last thing is we need to understand about data ownership. So that is one very important step that we have to conclude maybe on the European level. And last but not least, we have to understand the value of the data to make a decision whether an investment in, for instance, interfaces is valuable. So you see, that is, and so what I was, what I was trying to share is some observations that I have from my work as a researcher in mobility, working in Catena, working in this project family. I'd like to address to you, or I'd like to give to you an insight, and maybe you have a couple of ideas or questions how to connect to these services that you guys have that might be good to offer here. And yeah, I'm very happy to answer your questions or to discuss further. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Christian, for this very fascinating discussion examples that you're giving us of the importance of having different marketplaces and opportunities for data sharing. I think we have several burning questions from all the examples you have provided. I will hand over to my colleague Justina to shoot just a few of them.
Thank you very much, Christian. Indeed, I think what you are saying are all exactly the same problems we hear with our SMEs all the time. So this is this is a perfect reflection of reality we face with working with our companies, and we even had a chance today before the event to discuss with Niklas today that a perfect example that is easy for everyone to understand, and I think this is also what comes from what you are saying. Nowadays, the fastest growing and the best car producers are nothing more but software companies. So it's not the old and traditional companies as you have in Germany anymore. It's unfortunately Tesla and others, many examples in China that are super fast growing in their markets. They are software companies because we understood from the beginning on what they are seeking, what's the data for them, how to deal with that, you know. And here in Europe, we have to make this step to somehow link everything together. And I understand that the difficulties there. Now, when we talk with companies, because our companies are definitely digital enablers, so the ones trying to provide solutions, the issue for them is that innovation is there and they can make the traditional car to bring it to another level, right? To make it much more efficient. There are so many things, software solutions and so on, that could be done there to change the market, to improve the situation, to innovate and so on. The problem is access to data. The problem is that manufacturers indeed do not want to, or have difficulties to provide access. And you touched very, very well, I think, on also a bit of reasoning of why and the problems there. So perhaps the questions, just to maybe stress on some points that you already touched upon, are two. One of them is technical question. Do you think that what we have now in place with Catena that you mentioned, with Gaia-X and so on, do you think it's enough to make this all possible in practice? And also in terms of interoperability of all the standards that we have existing or still in making and so on. So do you think from technical perspective we are already there, and if not, what is missing? And the second question, even more important, given that we have in the panel and in the discussion today also a lot of policymakers, and it might be interesting for them to understand, what do you think could be done from policymaker side, both in terms of funding, but also in terms of legislation, to help to create this intermediary level, which could connect the SMEs that want to provide solutions, are reliable, have cyber secure, privacy compliant and so on solutions, with the big companies that probably want to innovate, want to open their data, but have a lot of questions, lack of trust, many other issues that you touched upon. So what could be maybe the initiatives, practical things which could be enforced and created in Europe to help the two to come together?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to answer this because this is really a compelling problem that I'm faced with in my research work. And that is, so I would like first to answer the question, is it enough? I would say from a technological point of view, it is enough. It is some kind of too much, obviously. So what Catena-X is doing is they're trying to customize a data space towards mobility needs, which doesn't using core services that doesn't exist right now. All right. So they are ahead of time and they putting so much effort and so much money in it. Like I said, it's a very, very successful initiative. But we do not need any more funding technological wise in this direction. At the same time, I say we're not doing enough because the trouble is, so why are we doing all this? Because of the lack of trust. Trust is a social concept. It's not a technological concept, it's a social concept. And what we see is that we're trying to use technology to overcome a social problem. That means that we have to look at this, the whole thing, in a more systematic way. And just technological answers are not solving the problem. So you say, are we doing enough technological wise? Yes. What we're not doing enough about is we're not looking enough into the business models that go along with the technology. We're not looking enough in the legal things that we that come along with the things. I give you an example what we discuss in the mobility data space working group. There is imagine you come up with a super perfect solution for data space. Just engineers have created it, and you have all the data in it, and it's wonderful. Everything is beautiful, all right? And then the legal people come and say, hey, that's great, but you have forgotten to address the requirements that come from GDPR, for instance. So you have created something great, but because you ignored this discipline, you can't use it anymore. And the same goes with the business people. They say, hey, great guys, you have invested €500 million. You have a fantastic data space, but you can't do business with it because of this, and that, right? So are we doing enough? No, systematic wise. We need more funding. We need more projects to address the disciplines that walk along with the technology. So just working on technology is not enough. We need to have to look at it in a systematic way. And if you look at the mobility system, then we have people acting in it. So you have to understand, what do they accept? How do they feel? What about trust? So this is all the, the psychological and trust and social issues. There is too few research and too few development going on here. We need to be creative on the legal side as well. And we have to be very creative on the business side as well. So we can, that brings us to the next question. So policymakers are in the room. Please do not ignore the disciplines that go along with the technology. That would be, that would be my, my question or my emphasis to go ahead here. So does this answer, is that answering your question?
Yes, definitely. Thank you very much. That's very, very good answer. And I hope that we can also spread the message on that.
Absolutely. And on this, I would like to indeed thank you, Christian, as well as Maria and Saran for the discussion in this session that gave us some very concrete ideas of the legal impact, but also the opportunities that are disclosing from the development of data spaces in different vertical sectors in Europe, and acknowledging the takeaways of this discussion. I'm now delighted to welcome our next distinguished guest, who is an honorable member of the Italian Senate, Professor Antonio Nicita, and is also a former commissioner of the competent authority for communication in Italy. So we are very delighted to give you the floor in order to give us some takeaways from the discussion you heard, and also from a policymaker, what are the concrete actions that member states can implement to disclose the opportunities that are coming out of this development from the legislative and market point of view. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I enjoyed listening many different aspects of the issue we are discussing. And let me start by some final issues that have been raised in the last intervention, which is the following. It seems that we are quite forward in the technological side of the story. I mean, the technological side means the way in which we can have some sort of partitioning of data, access to data, I mean, some categories of data for access and also for understanding who is creating the value. But we have problems on the economic side of the story on the one side and on the legal side of the story on the other. And the policy design that we need now has to do precisely with putting some more specific contribution on the economic side, try to understand why data is an economic good on the one side, but on the other, how should we design from a legal point of view the content of the property right which is attached to this data? And finally, how can we regulate this kind of access in a situation in which our ecosystem is not shaped by equal agents, but in which we have very big agents on the one side, the gatekeepers of the DMA and DSA on the one side, and on the others, other producers and consumers of data? Should we treat different subjects that have different dimension in terms of ability to collect, elaborate data, creating value of data in the same way when we refer to access or obligation of sharing? Or should we introduce some asymmetry, as we did actually in the past, in the first years of the Telecommunications Act, in which we have distinguished between big networks and small networks? So this is an open issue that we need to face. But let me start with the economic side of the story. We know that from an economic point of view, we have a sort of paradox, because data is an information good. The information good is what economists define a public good, which means an economic good that is not rival both in consumption and also in exclusion. So it's not possible to exclude someone to have access to this information good. But notwithstanding that, despite that, we have that big gatekeepers actually are appropriating this public good, transforming it in a sort of a de facto private good, whose owner is the platform, is the gatekeeper, not the producer of the economic good. So the paradox is the following. On the one side, we have an economic good that, for instance, it refers to our personal data that is starting as a public good, but that is ending as a private good, whose ownership belongs not to the individual who actually produced the data, but to the gatekeeper who is able to create value from that. This paradox needed to be faced by defining who is really the owner of this economic good. And a second paradox that we have is that, in a sense, the GDPR has introduced the idea that there is portability, for instance, in Europe, of data. So somehow this is suggesting that the data has an ownership clear, and so who is entitled to the portability of data is the owner. But on the other side, it's not clear how this could create an economic good, how this could create a marketplace for data. The paradox is that, in some sense, GDPR could create a sort of de facto exclusivity for gatekeepers, according to the data that they treat. Why this? Because big gatekeepers actually are committed not to sell the data they use, not to create a market for the data they use, which on the one side simply means having an exclusivity advantage over that data. So this is a sort of paradox that needs to be solved. And indeed, somehow, to some extent, the Data Act at the European level is trying to approach and to solve this paradox. But what we need is to clearly define from an economic point of view, what is this economic good that we call data? It is a private good. It needs to be traded in a marketplace. But also from a legal point of view, we need to understand the content of this good, which means not only what is a data, but also trying to understand what is the boundary of the data? What is the boundary of the property? Because if the data create a value, to what extent I can exert my ownership over possible values that are created by the initial access to the data. So the boundary of the data is also important in order to define from a legal point of view, on the one side, who is the owner, but also what is the value and who's entitled to get that kind of value. These are open issues that policymakers need to solve, actually, in the future. We are just at the initial steps with the Data Act and with all the other legislative production at the European level, but we need to give content to the technological issues that we have just listened before in the previous intervention, which means we need to cover with a specific act all the economic and legal issues that could create a marketplace for data. But this also needs to be coupled with a new regulation, in my view, which has to take into account that the issues of sharing data, the issues of having access to data, needs somehow to be shaped in an asymmetric way, because we are not the same, gatekeepers are not the same of smaller producers and users of data, and also sectors are not the same. Just thinking to the idea of producing an obligation to share data to Google, to Facebook, to Amazon on the one side, or to national banks on the other. The consequences are really different, also in terms of possible dominance in different relevant markets. So, in my view, we need to clarify that even if, as in the Data Act, the principle of access, of portability, of trade of data should be general in terms of principles, but in terms of obligation, I think it would be much more efficient for at least some period of time to introduce asymmetric obligation according to the dimension of the gatekeepers, because this will help also to create an industry of data and several producers and managers of data that may act in competition against these big gatekeepers. So what I think that we are just at the beginning, but we need to increase, to have further steps in terms of Data Act in Europe, because we are in a situation in which technology actually can help solve problems, but they need to be coupled with an economic clear definition of what is a market for data on the one side, but also with a legal design of rules and obligations that may really create a market for data. And I will stop here.
Thank you so much, Senator Nisita. And indeed, talking about the regulation side, it will be very interesting from a national policymaker like you to understand what do you think are the complexities for member states to implement some of the European legislation on data and to really bring the European data strategy into practice by implementing key pieces of legislation such as the DMA, the DSA, and the Data Act.
Yes, I agree. This is fundamental because we cannot have several different legislation on the one side. So we cannot have 27 legislation for that because the scale, the minimum scale is European on the one side. But on the other, since we have different legal regime, we need to have a clear homogeneous definition of the content of the property right related to data. And I think that in this respect, the European approach should really be helpful in that, because otherwise we will increase diversity and confusion and disharmonization among European countries. So what I think is that we have now a general framework that is the framework of the Data Act, that however needs to be much more in a granular way developed in order to really produce the instruments and the device that we need in order to implement a market for data, also from a legal point of view.
Thank you so much, Senator Nicita. And on this call for harmonization, I will say is what wrap up our discussion in the best possible way. So to conclude this event, let me really give a warm thank to all the speakers that contributed to the discussion. We had insights from the key research studies that our guest Nikos illustrated to us that set the scene for understanding the latest developments in the data marketplace in Europe. We had a discussion on the key solutions that are coming from strategic innovators such as Gaia-X, ENIAP, and the i3 market solution. And we had a crucial discussion on data spaces and on the developments that are coming in specific vertical sector from the automotive, but also the healthcare sector and so on. I think what unites all of this and put a crucial link with the legislation is the fact that the access to data can be key to disclose innovation that is bottom-up and to meet the policymakers' objectives, that is to create a European data economy that is truly dynamic and that can contribute to growing economic success and prosperity in our continent. But in order to do this, what we learned today and what we learned from our community in the SME is that we need to disclose opportunities for the many and not for the few. And the many in Europe are the 99% of SMEs that form the backbone of the industrial base. And we need to promote access to data in a way as it is being done from key legislative initiatives such as Data Act, that design a fair and open European data market for all. In this context, what we learn from our members, from our community, is that SME need to be granted fair contractual condition when it comes to disclosing the opportunities in the business to business sector. And but the SMEs in this context stand close to the purposes of the Data Act in order to make the most out of the legislation and the opportunities that come from the market. So it is essential that the opportunities on the market meet the purpose of the legislation, such that we can promote innovation that is bottom-up and that can drive data market solution while ensuring the goal of fairness and accessibility for all in Europe. So on this note, I would like to thank again all the speakers, all the attendants, not before saying that we will be keeping in touch to continue this interesting discussion on the next opportunity. Thank you very much to all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to European Digital SME Alliance.
Thank you, Isabel, and thank you all.